Hello, and welcome to the European Resilience Initiative Center video podcast. Pretty often, we believe that truth will always prevail. We think that it is enough just to spread the truth, the right word, to tell people what is going on the ground, and they will understand the war, they will understand what it's about, they will understand how to differentiate right things from the wrong ones. But does it always work that way? Why people often ignore the truth and even support the war of aggression, ignoring the facts which are being presented to them. Today, we talk with Aida Cerkez, who is a veteran journalist, an editor, a manager with over 30 years of experience covering the Balkans and everything you even are afraid of thinking about. Aida's career began during the Bosnian War from 1994 until 2018. She worked with the Associated Press, Sarajevo bureau chief, and she was leading coverage during and after the war. In 1995, she earned the Gremlin Award for managing the AP's best global media operation. And since 2017, Aida has been an editor at the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, OCCRP. You know this project as it reveals the best stories about hidden assets of criminal mafia, etc., including governments of Russia. So welcome to this interview, and thank you that you have found time for this conversation.
Thank you for inviting me.
When we were talking before this interview, I asked you about your surname, and I asked you, is your surname how related to the nation of Circassians? And we know Circassians were the nation which suffered from the first genocide in Europe in the modern history. And he said me, yes.
Yes, my father's family, they're all Cerkez. Apparently they came to the Balkans somewhere at the end of the Ottoman Empire and just stayed here. So I'm a descendant of these Cerkez, of whom I don't know very much about. I did see on YouTube they have beautiful national dresses and dances, and that's all I know. Nothing more. But I do know that my grandfather was, when the war in Bosnia started, he was asking me who's shooting and who's backing whom, and I was explaining to him, it's part of the Serbs who are in conflict with everybody else in Yugoslavia, and everybody else is backed by the West, and the Serbs are backed by Russia. And he goes, "Oh, here they are again." So, yeah, kind of my family has this bad experience with Russians, but I wish this would be fixed somehow. I just refuse to think that this is either personal or it's going to go forever. One day it's going to turn around. This is my dream. But yes, I'm a Cerkez.
And that's great to have you here with all your experience and with all your personal experience and family experience. But when we talk about the war, the 1990s, like a chain of wars, and how the world, I cannot say didn't care, but was not pretty much willing to understand what it's all about, coming up with new and new out-of-box ideas, saying we can offer that, and then doing nothing. I understand it's a pretty plain question, but how did it feel from inside to see that the war is going on and we're getting killed and slaughtered, and the world is just watching?
Right at the beginning, I thought that the profession of a journalist is to report what is going on so people outside would know, thinking that then they're going to do something about it. It took me 2 years to realize that they do know. But it's not that people, at the time, I thought people don't care if we live or die, that I personally don't matter, that the world is completely indifferent to the fact that I could die today or continue living like that. The, the feeling that you don't matter hurts sometimes more than hunger and thirst and all the shooting and the deaths around it. That's something you cannot swallow. But that's nothing compared to what came later. You know, explanations from the outside, which I heard like that. I am guilty for what is being done to me. You know, and that was, I think, the most painful thing, because we explained enough what is going on in Bosnia. And if so it was obviously that people don't want to know and don't want to face the reality. And that makes you bitter. Yes.
How can you precise it? What do you mean by saying that you were told that you were guilty of what has been done to you?
The equalization of guilt, the war in Bosnia, just like the war in Ukraine, were pure aggressions. It's an aggression of one country on another. And then to endure these constant accusations of both sides are guilty and both sides are to blame, and we shouldn't get involved. They should sort this out among themselves because this is ancient hatred. I thought at the time when I was listening to this that the world is just mean and evil. It is later when the war ended and I watched other wars, Kosovo, Chechnya, and other conflicts around the world, Syria and so on. But I realized that it is not that the world doesn't know. It is that the average person doesn't know what to do about it. And this helplessness, personal helplessness, when you sit in front of the television, like we sit now and watch Gaza and watch Ukraine, and you're just watching it, it bothers you, but you don't know what to do about it. You can send humanitarian aid. That's nice, and thank you. But it just is something that makes you temporarily feel better. It doesn't solve the problem. And when you sit down as a normal person, you actually, there's nothing I can really do to produce any positive effect. And this helplessness is so painful that sometimes people invent other stories to help themselves not to feel bad. And then, they're both guilty. That makes you feel bad. And it gives you amnesty. You don't have to do anything about it. When both sides are equally to blame, you do not have this feeling of guilt. And I think that's what's happening. Everybody knows very well what's going on. It's the denial just to help yourself feel better.
So the compassion and the shock when people witness brutality, combined with the understanding that you cannot immediately stop it from occurring, lead to a sort of indifference as a defensive mechanism.
Denial. It's not indifference. You're not indifferent. You're switching to denial. When you hear that something really terrible happened, that somebody in your family died, your first reaction is no. The first reaction is denial, and to deny makes it easier for you to bear the tragedy. Just don't see it. Look the other way. Deny it. You can't do this forever. But it is the initial reaction of almost everybody I know. It's simply denial. That rarely do you meet people who immediately are capable of facing difficult things. People usually try to evade them. It's like when you're a really good-looking woman and then you suddenly gain weight, 20 kilos, you don't like to look at into the mirror because of denial. You don't want to see that reflection of yourself. Same way, you don't want to see the reflection of yourself as being a helpless individual that doesn't matter and can't do anything about anything in the world, you know. And when you feel this small, then you start to deny. That's somehow my analysis.
When we look back at what happened back then and compare it to what's happening in Ukraine now, we know that nowadays in Ukraine there are a lot of calls for some peace talks. Why shouldn't you talk to Russia? Why shouldn't you find some sort of a compromise? Russia has their security interests, their legal interests. They want just to be safe from NATO expansion. You know all the arguments. Have you been told from outside in early 1990s that actually, why don't you talk to Belgrade? Why don't you talk to the Serbs? Why don't you offer them a sort of a compromise which would respect interests of both sides?
Yes, all the time, you know. And that was the UN line. The two sides have to come to an agreement. Well, the two sides are in war. They can't get into an agreement. And besides, one side is on the territory of the other. You know, you have an aggressor, you have somebody who's defending himself. You know, how now you need to find a compromise. What would be the compromise? So what can be the compromise? You're in my house. You're an intruder. You came into my house violently. I'm fighting you back. And the police comes and says, you two should really find a compromise. What compromise? Like, I'm going to let this completely unknown person live in the bedroom and I'm going to be living in the living room. It's my apartment, the whole thing. So to me, that was ridiculous in a way. And then the United Nations sent humanitarian aid, for which I am very grateful because we wouldn't have made it without it. But it did somehow look as if your neighbor violently came to your house, is fighting you. The police comes, looks at both sides, like, you guys have to find a compromise, but here is a sandwich if you're hungry. And that was my perception. And then the whole thing ended so with this compromise that created a country that is divided. One still living in the living room, the other one is in the bedroom. The one who's living in the bedroom still believes that this whole apartment should actually belong to the neighboring apartment. It should be just one big apartment for him. You should go. And that's going on for 30 years. And that's the compromise. And I think that Ukraine, if it can avoid a peace agreement of the Dayton model, which is our model, a divided country, like two regions as part of one country, but they don't get along. It's hell. It's really like a country on life support. You know, you cannot survive without foreign aid, and these are no conditions for normal life, but that's how wars end if there is no winner. Both sides are unsatisfied, and it's a Frankenstein of a constitution.
Oh, but coming back to your experience back then, now we know what happened after. We know how the things unfolded. But coming back then, early 1990s, you work in Sarajevo, and the first shooting happens, the first bombs are falling. It's new to you. What were your first thoughts, and what was a reaction from your headquarters when you sent the first messages?
I started working like 3 months for the Associated Press 3 months after the war started. So it wasn't an initial, I wasn't the initial information. But I did find out later that everybody really outside saw and knew that this war is going to happen, except us who are sitting here. We just really refused to believe. Let me tell you a story. Yugoslavia at the time had 6 republics. The most Western republic was Slovenia, and then comes Croatia, then comes Bosnia, Serbia is here, Kosovo, Montenegro, and Macedonia. So this whole conflict started in Slovenia. It lasted like 4 or 5 days, very short. But it was a shock to us that in our country, a region is in war with another region. And I remember my mother crying in front of the television, and she, I cannot believe this, and oh, these poor people. And she finished, thank God it's not here. Then the war spilled over to the next republic, Croatia, and it went on for a whole year. And we were watching it on TV and crying, and these poor people, and the refugees started coming to Bosnia from Croatia, and the whole world got involved. And every time we talked about it in the house, my mother would say, thank God it's not here. Then it spilled over to the some villages and towns within Bosnia and Herzegovina that are at the border to Croatia and Serbia. And that was already in our country, but on the outskirts. So that was already a reason for panic. But she finished again, thank God it's not here. Then my aunt one night called from the other end of the city, Sarajevo. And we couldn't even understand what she was saying because she was sobbing. What? What are you talking about? We can't understand anything you say. She's really calmed down. So what we gathered is that she is standing on the balcony and she's watching the neighboring neighborhood being bombed. And we tried to calm her down. And Gordana, really, you should take something, do you have any pills or something? Finally, this whole conversation ended after an hour. My mother hung up, looked at me and said, Gordana should really see the doctor, like she's imagining. But then we heard on the news that it is really happening. She was right. There is shelling of that neighborhood. And we were in shock, like Gordana was right. My God. And my mother said, thank God it's not here. 3 days later, the door of the balcony from the kitchen was open. It was a very nice spring day, sunny day. I was standing with my baby against the wall in the kitchen, and my mother was frying something in the pan when the first shell landed on our neighborhood on the roof of the building across the street. It was a horrible sound. The baby started screaming right away. And this is the first time I've heard an explosion. And I saw this gray smoke going up. And my mother stood there with that fork. Look, did you see this? Yeah. And she goes, thank God it's not here. I thought, Mom, you've been saying this since Slovenia. It is here. We have to go to the basement. You don't want to face it. The disbelief is so strong, and I saw the same thing when Ukraine started. My colleague from Kiev, we were talking on Tuesday, and I said, don't you think it's weird that they're kind of exercising that the Russians are exercising on the border to Ukraine? That's kind of rude. You don't do this. Oh, no. She kept on trying to convince me, oh, no, they wouldn't dare. It's just an exercise. And Anna, they will roll in. No. The world is not going to let. And I'm listening to her, and I could see myself. I wasn't even angry with. I could see myself. She doesn't want to realize the reality. That was on Tuesday. The Russians rolled in on Thursday. It's denial, denial, denial. And Ukrainians were shocked. Although we all saw what's going to happen. But when you're inside, the truth is so terrible that you don't want to face it and you deny.
Absolutely. I can remember all these days before, and few Ukrainians with whom I spoke, they understood the severity of the situation, but most just denied it because that was the danger people lived for years with, and they didn't see a reason why the situation should escalate so rapidly. I remember 2 days before the full-scale invasion, I came to Kiev to talk to my friends and to discuss what they should do when the Russian missiles would fall on Kiev. And we were walking through Mariinsky Park, close to Presidential Palace. And there were people, it was a sunny day, there were people walking with the prams, with their babies. And I could hear the conversations, and they were about what embassy has evacuated and what has not, and why those who have evacuated, why those are cowards, because nothing would happen. And I was listening to that and thought, okay, it will happen indeed, most probably. And that's why I'm here to talk to my friends what we should do when things happen. But the whole city was just enjoying a sunny day and was denying the immediate attack, which will happen a few hours after
Let,
that.
let me compare this to something. And I realized a long time ago and I call it the smoker syndrome. All smokers know that smoking can give you lung cancer. They're aware of that, but they still smoke, thinking that this will only happen to other people, not to them. We know wars, but they always happen to other people, not to us. Just like smokers. And then when one day the diagnosis comes and it, your whole life is upside down and you still can't believe it. Although anybody has the right to tell you, well, you were smoking for 20 to 30 years. What did you expect? Somehow there's this disconnect between reality and our behavior somewhere in our heads.
That is something which reminds me on our discussion in Germany, where I'm mostly based. And people continue talking, yeah, Russia will never attack NATO because NATO is so strong, Russia will not dare, they will not send their troops there. Come on, Russia already operates on the NATO ground. We have our military installation being surveyed by Russian drones. We have our people getting killed. We have our cables getting cut. We have sabotage groups operating on our soil. Why do you think that Russia respects us, our strength, allegedly strength, so much that they would not dare to attack us? That's exactly what happened before Russia's Ukraine invasion. But another thing which I wanted to ask you is, we know a lot about atrocities being done against Bosnian people during that war. What were the reactions in the West when the first reports came?
Oh, this is horrible and it must be stopped. And then nothing for 3 years. But eventually the intervention came. Compared to other conflicts, 3.5 years is not a long time when you look at the Middle East, Timor, Kashmir. This all goes on for decades. So you think your own war is the most tragic one. It was just 3.5 years. And then it was stopped thanks to the international community, the alliance of the willing, let's say. It was not formally called like this. And mainly thanks to the United Nations, to the US. But they stopped it. For us, it might look too late, but it's actually record time, 3.5 years when you compare it with to other wars. Now, the thing that was done really good, and let me share this experience with Ukrainians. I always emphasize the importance of the court. You know, when everything ends, you have so many traumatized people who have lost somebody that very easily they have nothing to lose anymore. Very easily, you can imagine that there could be some revenge, you know. Now you have to channel that revenge. You have to channel those feelings. And the best way to channel them are international courts, not local, international courts. Because if you want revenge on the killer of your child, will you be more satisfied if you just go find him and kill him? Or will you be more satisfied if you get him on an international court to sit there for whole humanity to condemn what he has done and jail him for life? Which means that the entire human race has agreed that he is the bad guy and he should sit and rot in jail for the rest of his life, which is somehow influencing also his legacy, you know, or just to kill him on the spot. Now, I can tell you that you will get much more satisfaction in putting someone in jail in an international court. And it's very important to have that kind of justice. There will be no peace without justice. But which justice? The monopole of punishment should stay with the courts, preferably international courts. It's one thing if the winner, like in Nuremberg, if the winner puts the loser in jail or hangs him. But it's completely different if the international court, put together from representative of all continents, of all races, and of humanity, condemns and locks up the perpetrator. That will give you satisfaction. And that's why I'm such an advocate of international courts.
That for those international court bodies should be created like a tribunal for a certain war. And then the question arises how deep you should go to prosecute people. We know, for example, in Ukraine, there are people who have committed real crimes, who were kidnappers, who were rapists, who were murderers, who tortured people, who killed people. Without any question, these people should be prosecuted. But then you have an endless scale of collaborators. You have people who participated in tortures. You have people who were helping to kidnap Ukrainian children, who loaded them on trucks to send them to Russia. You have people at the school who brainwashed Ukrainian children on all the occupied territories to militarize them and to send them later to the Russian army. You have people who worked at Russia's system of occupational administration on different levels. Where should the prosecution stop, and what kind of collaboration should remain punishable, and what could be excused by the necessity of the situation, like, for example, being an owner of a shop which sells food to the locals, but also to Russian soldiers? Should this person be punished or not? I spoke a lot with Ukrainian people from the liberated communities, and sometimes they say they are dissatisfied with the justice because, as they say, those who need to be punished get free, and those who don't need to be punished got punished.
If you're gonna, what is the crime if you sell bread to a Russian soldier? What's your crime? You sold bread to someone. That's not a crime. Yeah, you might. Well, no, I'm not asking. I'm just rhetorically. You know, there is international standards of what a crime is. You know, and it's being debated. Even here in Bosnia, it was being debated. Like, if I slap your face, is that a war crime? Well, if you are in a concentration camp and I'm a guard and I slap your face, is it then a war crime? It's very sensitive, that I would leave that to lawyers. I'm a journalist. But collaborators, sometimes, if you remember, after the Second World War, there were women in Paris and everywhere who were dating German soldiers and officers. And after the war, they were publicly shamed, and their hairs were cut, and because they were seen as collaborators. Now, I'm against such brutal. I think this should be put in the past, but sometimes you have to get over things. I mean, these little acts of collaboration. If you're going to go after everybody, very soon there's nobody going to be left. So sometimes it's very painful for people when everything ends to realize that they were on the bad side of history. At the time, it's not clear to them. I met many Serbs after the war to whom I spoke, and it was very painful for them. They were, through propaganda, and convinced that they were the good guys. And then later to find out that some courts have decided that they were actually on the side of the bad guys was shocking and very, very hurtful. It's just you have to take into consideration propaganda and how people fall for it. And sometimes these little acts of collaboration that you see as collaboration and they don't, maybe should be forgiven. How about that?
What is the way for achieving a sort of social peace after the war when the wounds are so deep that people do not know what to do with them? There will be people who have lost their families. There will be people who have lost their property. There will be people who have lost their health. There will be people who do not know what to do now after years and years of war because their previous jobs have gone, their skills have gone. How to heal the society which have been suffered by the trauma of being attacked, hurt, partly killed?
Number one is justice, to put the perpetrators and the masterminds in jail. That's number one. The second thing is people afterwards really want to know where they're on the right side of history, where they're on the morally right side. And once that is established, they can see themselves as victims. But there are programs to work with these victims to turn tragedy into a lesson. You have to give them a purpose of life. You have a lot of, for example, in Bosnia, you have a lot of associations where people who have lost someone or something get together and they try to channel their grief in a constructive way. Usually, they advocate for peace and reach out to victims on the other side. And then something really strange happens. They gang up together. Once they face each other, once they hear each other's stories, like, I've been told that you wanted to kill me. And you said, but that's not true. Then you attacked me. Yeah, but I thought I was acting in self-defense because I was afraid of this and this and this. But then you did this and this. Once you clear the air, very often people gang up together against politicians. And then they're together bitter against something, So you have to give it some time and work on it, not sweep it under the carpet. For example, yes, I blame Serbia for everything bad that happened to me because of that war. But at the same time, my television is on these days for months, day and night, because I'm watching Serbian students rebel against their government. It's the most progressive movement currently in the world. And I would give them my heart. We are here sending messages of love. We are sending support in any way. We are offering them, if they are persecuted, we are offering them our homes to escape. You simply realize in the end that not a nation was your enemy, but an idea. And once you recognize people within that nation who share your idea, you gang up together. You know, it's as simple as that. I would give everything now to the Serbian students.
Can a nation being consumed by an aggressive imperialistic idea, and can nation be healed from this possession?
Oh, of course. You know, that this happens to everybody. It's like a virus that goes around. You know, what would you tell the Germans? They all believed in Hitler. I mean, there was some resistance in Germany, the White Rose and stuff, but that was so minimal, 0,000 something. They really believed in what this guy was saying and what the propaganda was spreading. You know, it was a shock afterwards when they found out what was done in their name. And you can easily say that pretty much the German nation has been healed. You know, it happened to the French. What did the French do in Northern Africa? The brutality, and with what idea? And you know, yet they have faced their past and realized that was actually not okay. You know, the Spanish, the most successful genocide in Latin America. All the Europeans together committing this genocide in Northern America when they moved over there. You know, yes, it can be healed. Once you face your past and distance yourself. It wasn't me. And if it was my father, well, that was still not me. There will be a lot of families that will be broken up. You know, I know a German family where all of this during the Second World War, I was 9 when I was sitting with them at the dinner table, and the oldest son came home and said to his father, "So, what happened during the Second World War?" He had just found out. And his father made the mistake of starting the answer with, "Well, if Hitler would have won," that was the moment when the son, it was a middle son, just got up, looked at everybody, turned around, closed the door, never returned home. I'm 63 now. That happened when I was 9. He never came home. And this family has fallen apart. At least he has fallen off the family. That will happen once the new generation is faced with the truth. So you have to give them time. But yes, you know, I think that every nation in the world, what did the Chinese do? What did the Japanese do? Had these moments of being bad and then getting out of it. That Russia is not unique, and Germany is not unique, and France is yet not unique, and it's just human nature.
While every nation has a chance to get healed, and even the worst perpetrators, like we in Germany, were during the World War II, have demonstrated that democratization is not impossible, and maybe one day Russian Empire will fall apart and Russian nation will be healed from imperialism. That until that, we need to look at the roots of the crimes and stay on the side of those who have been attacked, whose voices cannot be heard in the world, and help them to spread the truth.
They are heard. They are heard. They are heard. Absolutely. They're heard. It's just what to do about it. How do you intervene if you're dealing with a nuclear power? What can you do? That's it's not about we don't know what's going on, or we're on the side of the perpetrators and aggressors. It's just what to do. What? I mean, and there's a big difference. The entire West is sending weapons from day one to Ukraine. Bosnia was under an arms embargo. So we have progressed.
Indeed, and arms embargo helped the aggressor, as we know. Hopefully today it's not the case. And thank you for this interview. It was Aida Cerkez, who is a journalist, editor, manager with over 30 years of experience covering the Balkans. And she was reporting from Sarajevo as a correspondent and chief of the Sarajevo office of the Associated Press during the war. And now she is very active in building up bridges between Bosnia and Ukraine and helping Ukrainian journalists to understand what is going on in the world and how to spread the word and how to deal also with trauma of the war. Thank you, Aida.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.